welcome to the New England Football Show presented by Mortgage Right. I'm your host, John Serenitas. As always, I'm joined by my partner, Kevin Stone, and tonight we are joined by Chris Price from the Boston Globe. Chris, first things first, great to see you, my friend. How are you this evening on this busy Monday?
Yeah, even though free agency only, the tampering period started 8 hours ago, it's been a wild stretch for the Patriots in particular. So I'm doing well, trying to keep up, as we talked about before we came on, but I'm doing pretty well.
Yeah, same with us. And you just hit the nail on the head in terms of a wild stretch. It has been a busy day. I think we should stop with the tampering nonsense, by the way. Just make it the day and get it over with, because I know that the league year starts on Wednesday, but the tampering thing drives me nuts. We'll get into that anyway. Before we do, though, I do want to remind you that if you're in the market to sell your current home, purchase your first home, or refinance, give our good friend Herb Devine a call, 781-254-2846. You can also shoot him an email at herb@mortgageright.com. With over 27 years of experience, he has the knowledge and the know-how you need in your corner. The busy season in the real estate world is upon us. It is the spring real estate season. There's more inventory on the market. If you're ready to purchase your next home, you need someone like Herb in your corner, give him a call again at 781-254-2846, or shoot him an email at herb@mortgageright.com. He and his team are available anytime, including nights and weekends. And Chris, let's just jump right into it. I mean, look, I think we all knew that they had the most cap space in the league. I think we all knew the Patriots were going to spend some money. There was some uncertainty in regards to how much they would spend, but I'm not sure any of us thought that they would be this busy on day one. We thought it could be a possibility, but to me, this is on par with what they did in 2021. They spent a lot of money. I did some simple math tonight. They gave out between last night and today about $269 million worth of contracts. Just some initial thoughts on that.
And that includes, John, right off the bat, that's some great math, and that includes almost $150 million in guaranteed money just on the defensive side of the football. We're talking about Milton Williams and Carlton Davis and Harold Landry. This is a group, this is a team that has really been aggressive. And look, you can fault him in the past for not spending money. I know we have before, but they get an A for effort across the board. Even with the people like Chris Godwin, who ultimately didn't want it, they were ready to pay him $20 million extra. So look, you can complain about the Patriots on any number of levels, but their willingness to spend money this year shouldn't be called into question when you look at the contracts they doled out over the first day of free agency.
Yeah, and I think, you to your point, and Kevin, I didn't mean to cut you off there. To your point, I think we all knew going into this that Milton Williams was a strong possibility. They were going to have to overpay, and they did going into free agency. Most people thought he was probably going to get somewhere between 18 and 22 million. They went well beyond that at 26 million. We talked a lot about this with other guests that we've had on in recent weeks, Chris, that they were going to have to pay the suck tax to get some of these guys to sign. And they did that today. Every single one of these guys, at least in my opinion, on the surface, was an overpay. Would you agree that they had to pay the suck tax? And would you agree that they did ultimately overpay these guys?
I think two of the guys stand out to me as maybe not overpays, maybe more market value types. Carlton Davis, who is a really good number two corner. Now, it's still an average annual value of $20 million. It's a pretty good neighborhood to be in. But I think when you consider his background in Terrell Williams in Detroit, I think maybe they caught a little bit of a break there. The other one, to a lesser extent, and it's probably more in line with what he is, but you might argue Harold Landry. And again, this is because of his background with Mike Vrabel in Tennessee. It seemed like the most natural fit. And again, this is something I wrote. It's maybe the least surprising free agent signing that we've seen so far, I would say, across the league. So, given the background there with those guys, I don't know if they're necessarily overpays. But yeah, you needed to do this. You needed to be aggressive with the checkbook. I'll go back to the Godwin thing where they were willing to pay him $20 million more than what he ended up getting in Tampa Bay. That was a sign to me that this was a different approach this year. I love the phrase. I think Tom Curran used it too the other day, the suck text. You got to be able to do that. And they did it. They did it across the board. Now, the one guy who I think I would have liked to have seen is Ronnie Stanley, but Ronnie Stanley didn't get to the market. So, what can you do? Godwin ultimately didn't get to the market. So what can you do? But look, I would give them a B+ across the board for free agents here in the first day. I always get caught up, and this is the last point on this I'll make. I always get caught up in the phrase, the great phrase from John Wooden, don't mistake activity for achievement. But in this case, I think activity and achievement here go hand in hand when you're talking about the Patriots and their operation over the first 36 or so hours here of free agency.
Chris, you sort of hit it there, but given that Ronnie Stanley is off the board and Chris Godwin is off the board, T. Higgins wasn't going to be an option. I feel like they've done very well sort of navigating that second and third tier. I wrote this yesterday. They had to hit. They had to hit on these guys, and they have so far. You still have the draft. You still have some receivers out there, but given what their options were, it's hard to call this a home run just because of where they're at overall, but this was a great job by them navigating that second and third tier, in my opinion. Do you agree?
Yeah, and that's a great point too. I think we kind of get caught up at this time of year in the big ticket guys, the high level free agents, the Ronnie Stanley types, the T. Higgins types, and really in this case, Milton Williams. But you don't win in this league unless you have a robust middle class. And one of the things they did today was build out the middle class of that roster, and that includes bringing back Austin Hooper. I think Austin Hooper, you don't win without.
I didn't even include his contract in my total, so yeah, I'm glad you mentioned him.
Yeah, but it's one of those things where that middle class, that group, the middle of your roster needs to be healthy, needs to be robust, needs to be, a group of contributors. You're not going to have to rely on them week after week, but when you do rely on them, they have to come up bigger than what we've seen the guys in the Patriots middle class do over the last couple of years. This is a very impressive group. They need to be able to continue that moving forward. We talked about Matt Collins before he came out. I love Matt Collins. Matt Collins is going to be a folk hero in New England by the end of 2025 if he plays anywhere near the way he did the last couple of years. The glue guys, the locker room guys, the high character, the culture guys, those are guys that for the most part they went after. I would have loved to have seen Grady Jarrett. I think Grady Jarrett would have checked a lot of boxes if they could have gotten him, but he was snapped up pretty quickly by the Bears. But yeah, Kevin, to your point, and I think it's a good one, that they really did well to address the middle class of this roster moving forward. I'm going to be fascinated to see how today impacts what they do in the draft. If, this means they're not going to go after a Mason Graham type, or maybe the fact that they didn't get a left tackle means that Will Campbell's going to be here. But look, in this moment, in a vacuum today, Monday, March 10th, I think you give them a big thumbs up for what they did.
Yeah, I don't, the one thing I will say, though, is when you look at the guys they signed, they didn't sign middle-class guys in terms of the guys that were on the market. Milton Williams was the number one free agent on the market. Yeah. Carlton Davis was a top 5 free agent on the market. So it's easy to say that they may have addressed the middle of the roster, but I think they went after the best guys on the market, and they were able to land at least 2 of them. And you can make the argument, if you want to add Harold Landry to that they landed 3 of the top 15 free agents. So, I think, to your point, though, Chris, and I think it's well taken about them needing to address the middle of this roster. They certainly did that. But my question to you is, obviously going into this offseason, when you offensive tackle, wide receiver, their 2 primary needs. After that, you can make the argument, edge rusher, defensive tackle, corner. Were you surprised that so much of the impetus today was on addressing the defense and not necessarily addressing the offense? They did sign Morgan Moses, which I didn't love that contract for a 34-year-old right tackle. He's played a lot of football, but he's 34. They did sign Morgan Moses, as you mentioned, and I think this has kind of gotten lost in the shuffle. They were willing to overpay Chris Godwin to get him here, but were you surprised that they focused so much on the defense on this first day of free agency?
I think it had a lot to do with the players that were available in the moment.
I think that's a great point because I agree with you.
Yeah, I think if there was more depth on the offensive side of the ball, if this was a great free agent class of, left tackles or wide receivers, or even a good group I think they would have gone in that direction as well. I think you kind of have to play the cards that you were dealt. And this year, we've seen an awful lot of defensive talent, reach free agency. We didn't see an awful lot of offensive talent reach free agency. Again, I'm going to be fascinated to see what this means for this group moving forward. I think for me, going back to the Milton Williams thing, that for me was the deal that put him over the top. When the news came down, he was going to the Panthers, and everyone kind of went, oh, especially after you lose out on Godwin and you lose out on Stanley. Again, those guys were never coming here. We know that now, but it's all part of the conversation. That was the move that signified that they were real players in this market. But yeah, I think, John, I think it's a great question. And I think when you look at the players that were out there, the players that they had to pick from in free agency, I think they made the right call. Now, again, I think this sets up a very interesting scenario heading into the draft or trades. We could talk about Brandon Ayuk. But right now, I think they did a great job fortifying the defensive side of the ball with the players that were available.
Yeah, one thing I do want to add real quick, too, is that going into this process, one of the things that I kept harping on the last couple of weeks was I felt that I had talked to a couple of people in the scouting community that said to me that they felt that the Patriots were really going to be hyper-focused on the adding those guys on their second contract, and that if they were going to try to speed up the rebuild, if you will, they were really going to focus on guys that are going into their third contract, late 20s, early 30s, short-term, high AAV. That's exactly what they did today. They literally cornered that market. Milton Williams is the exception to that. He's going into his second contract. He's the one guy that fits the first part of what I said. But they really, really focused on adding guys in that 28 to 31 range, 3 years, and they gave him a lot of money up front.
But they didn't do that with a lot of the wide receivers. And there's still a lot of guys like that out there. There's the Stephon Diggs, Amari Cooper types, those guys that Cooper Kupp, 28, 29 to 31, 32. And maybe it's just the position and maybe the miles. And, I think that all figures into it too. They haven't gone after a lot of those guys because a lot of those guys feel like last piece of the puzzle type of guys, where if you're the Bills, let's say, and you want to get over the hump, or if you're the 49ers or whatever, you're looking for one more guy, one more receiver to get you where you want to go. That there seems to be a lot of those guys out there. Those are not guys who are good fits for this offense. We love Cooper Kupp. I love Cooper Kupp. I love Stephon Diggs, probably more than a lot of people. But Amari Cooper, those kind of guys are not necessarily the kind of guys who are going to come here at this stage of their careers, and they're not necessarily good fits here at this stage of their careers. But I agree with you when it comes to everyone else out there. The other positions, they avoided a lot of those guys.
Chris, you were obviously down in Indianapolis for the Combine. A lot of conversations go on and all that. Is what's happened so far sort of what you heard might happen while you were down there, or has it been complete opposite?
It's all about building from the inside out, and you can use the phrase building a bully. You can use the phrase, the Philadelphia model, whatever you want to use. That's the fundamental basis of their approach to this offseason, taking a cue out of Howie Roseman's book and looking at investing in the offensive and defensive lines and going from there. I still think there's a possibility that, it comes down to Mason Graham or Will Campbell at number 4. If they stick at 4, if they end up trading down, the scenario changes. But, and that goes back to the idea of building those, getting those big bodies in there. It's pretty much followed, form. The first day or two of free agency, everyone is aware of what the Patriots are trying to do. That's not to say that they wouldn't, take a swing at Chris Godwin if he came to, he got to the market, but their focus is on getting bigger and stronger and tougher and building a team like Mike Vrabel had in Tennessee, just a priority on that size, that strength, that physicality, the smarts. And so far, they've done a pretty good job of doing it.
Yeah, and again, when he got hired, I think we all knew this is how he was going to want to build this football team. Let's not forget, this is how Bill Belichick wanted to build his teams too. This is kind of the prevailing thought process around the league. The fans want the skill guys, but the reality is, and You mentioned the Philadelphia Eagles. We saw that in this past Super Bowl. You win up front. And if you could solidify yourself up front, we've also seen it with the resurgence of the Detroit Lions. If you could solidify your offensive line, defensive line, that model helps you accelerate your process and you can become more competitive sooner. When it comes to who they signed today, Chris, is there that one signing that when you look at that signing, you say to yourself, yes, I think this guy can come in and contribute right away and make an impact on this football team? Who is that one guy they signed?
I think any one of the defensive guys. I do, with the exception of the defensive tackle, and I'm forgetting his name.
Tonga.
Yeah. I don't know enough about him. I'll be honest, off the top of my head, but the rest of that defensive group is really good. Spillane is a sideline
very underrated player.
Yeah,
I mean, he had 158 tackles last year.
Yeah,
the guy can play.
He's not going to be overwhelming, but he's just. I was watching stuff on him today. He's around the ball all the time. He's a great style, and I think he's going to push Bentley and Tavai for playing time at that tackle spot. Williams is obviously great. Landry, I'm curious to see if Landry is transitioning to that third down only stage of his career, because he is 29 and he's kind of slowed a little bit, although maybe he's going to kind of get a little bit of a recharge playing for Williams and Vrabel again. The other thing too, and look, I'm a confirmed special teams apologist, guys. I love Mac Hollins. I do. I'm not gonna deny it. I think Mac Hollins, he's a gonzo special teams lunatic in the best possible way. He makes at least one hit a game that's going to have the hair on your neck standing up. He's just, the way he approaches the game, his attitude, his style. I think this guy's going to be a folk hero again in New England by the end of the season if he plays the way I think he's capable of playing. The other thing too, and we got to mention this, I wrote this, that the Josh Dobbs signing is really interesting, and I think it's a referendum on how you feel about Joe Milton and his performance in that regular season finale. It's like, all right, Joe, way to go. Thank you for winning us that unwinnable game. Here's your reward, a backup quarterback controversy going into 2025. So I'm enthused about all of them. I am, but I think the guys on the defensive side of the ball have the greatest chance of having a real impact. I don't know if it's cheating by saying Williams, I think, is going to be the guy, who's going to have the greatest impact. But I think he's at the with the head of the list.
Chris, offensively, obviously left tackle, still a huge question mark. Where do you think they go? So for me, a guy like Joe Noteboom, where it's a name, it's not a sexy name, but it's another veteran. It's a guy who can, sort of stabilize that room. There's rumors of David Andrews possibly being out, so you need sort of that veteran leadership. Where do you think they might go there, aside from maybe a Will Campbell or, a member in the draft?
I still think Cam Robinson's a possibility. But
he's going to come cheaper if nothing else now.
Exactly. Right now he's going to come cheaper. And he does have the background with the offensive line coach. I think that there is some value there. But yeah, your best path forward might be Will Campbell. I know that there's a lot of talk about the arms, but if you're okay with the arms, Elliot Wolf seems to be okay with shorter arms. It's, Mike Vrabel seems to be okay with shorter arms. It just kind of is what it is. If he's going to be the guy, then you take him, and then if you have to kick him into guard, then, you figure out a way to kick him to guard, and you figure out, something to do with Cole Strange, and, maybe Cam Robinson is still the answer there at left tackle. But I think that Robinson, Campbell are two guys who are going to be part of the conversation, at least here moving forward, when you talk about the left tackle spot in New England.
Yeah, it's going to be fascinating. And unfortunately, there aren't enough quality veterans on the market. Even a guy like Joe Noteboom, I mean, he's a stopgap. When you look at him, a Jedrick Wills, Cam Robinson struggled last year, but I do think he's better than a Vidarian Lowe. I think a Joe Noteboom or a Wills, those guys probably come in and compete with Vidarian Lowe. You can't necessarily pencil them in as starters, which I think Robinson you can.
Yeah, I think you can also make an argument that Vidarian Lowe is better, and I'm not saying he's going to be the guy in 2025, but I think Vidarian Lowe might be better with Cole Strange playing next to him for 17 games.
Yeah,
as opposed to having a rotating series of guards at the position. Just consistency, stability. That's all you're looking for at this point with that offensive line. You know, you got to walk before you can run. I also knew too that, look, guys, Scott Peters was not the best position coach for that group. I think that his dogmatic coaching style rubbed a lot of guys the wrong way. And the younger guys didn't know what they didn't know, so maybe they didn't have a problem with it. But I know some of the older guys kind of rolled their eyes a little bit from time to time at the coaching approach and the style and the technique. So I think having that change there is going to be good. But again, you just need to stay healthy. You need to stay healthy. You need to start to build some consistency. You need to start to build some continuity there. And if you end up having to go with, again, Cole Strange and Vidarian Lowe on the left side, and maybe you find someone, as a cut down point in camp, but you got to get a left tackle.
Yeah, and it's interesting too because they're going to have some tough choices to make inside. There's a lot of bodies at guard and center there. I mean, Strange, last 2 weeks of the regular season, he played center. He could certainly be in the mix to be the starting center, depending on what happens with Andrews. You got Caden Wallace, who now, in retrospect, profiles more as a guard. So you got Wallace, Robinson, Onwenu, Strange, City So. You've got a lot of bodies there in the interior. There's a glut. And then you mentioned Will Campbell. If you draft him, you're talking about a guy with shorter than 33-inch arms. If you draft him, he could potentially end up sliding inside, which, depending on who you talk to, is a doomsday scenario for the Patriots. But offensive tackle is an obvious need. But there is a real glut on the inside there, Chris. And it makes you wonder, can they take a Will Campbell knowing that eventually they might have to move him inside? That's going to be the question there with him.
Yeah, and it's a legitimate question too. And I talked to Dante Scarnecchia for this, not to drop a name here, but I talked to Dante Scarnecchia for this, and he reminded me of Joe Tooney and Logan Mankins were both left tackles in college, and so and Tooney played more left tackle or has played more left tackle in the pros than Mankins did, but have that versatility. It's always a good thing. It never hurts to have an ability to play as many positions as possible. And again, like you guys referenced, we don't know what's going to happen with David Andrews. His camp is pretty silent right now. But look, it's good. It's good to have as many different guys as possible. You get to sift through, ideally you'd sift through that group in the spring and the summer, and then Labor Day comes around and you have those 5, and then you're off to the races with them. So I do think there is a glut, and there could very well be a glut there along the interior, but I think there is still enough versatility with some of those guys where you're going to have a better situation in 2025. Look, the bar's low, but it's going to be a better situation in 2025 than you had in 2024.
I thought it was interesting what you said too about Scott Peters, because just watching him at the times that I was at practice, so much was made about the strike system. Of course, he's a Bill Callahan disciple. So much was made about the strike system and implementing it. And I know a lot of the younger guys on the beat really got into that, and they would ask me questions about it as a former offensive line coach. And I'm like, you know what? It's great. It's going to work for some guys, and it's not going to work with others, because at some point when you're out there in between the white lines on a Sunday afternoon, you got to play the game. You can't be worrying about, I got to put my hand here, and then I got to put my hand here in pass pro. You just got to go out and play. And so, to your point, I think that it was almost overkill. I think Scott Peters is a good coach, and I think he'll do a good job in Cincinnati, but it was almost overkill. It was too much. You want to emphasize certain things, but this is a group that I think needs to get back to the fundamentals under Doug Marrone.
Yeah, I agree with you. I couldn't agree with you more there, John. It just kind of got away. And look, they've had how many different, 5, 6 different offensive line coaches since Dante left? They need, we talk about continuity and consistency just from a playing perspective. They need the same voice there, in their ear, year after year, building up that plan, that playing style, that approach. And I think Peters was well respected by a lot of guys who played the position, and well respected by a lot of guys in that locker room, but he wasn't for everyone. And I think that was one reason, not the only reason, but I think that was one reason why that offensive line group struggled in 2024.
I think he deserves a lot of credit just for the way he handled us, on those Tuesdays or Wednesdays, whatever it was. During the year, he was answering every question, honestly and straightforward. So best of luck to him. But going back to defense real quick, Carlton Davis, obviously, do now have a cornerback, number 2 opposite side, Christian Gonzalez. Still don't know about Jonathan Jones. Obviously, Karen Garrigan had a report that he's going to test the market might come back, but just your thoughts on having someone to complement Gonzalez now on the opposite side.
The thing about Carlton Davis is not so much his ball skills. He's got very good ball skills. He's very sticky in man coverage. The Lions played a lot of man coverage last year, and I think that's going to be great when you talk about those second and third wide receivers. The thing about him, he's physical, and he's also really tough against the run. His nickname is C Murder. This is a hard guy, man. This is a tough guy. This is not your average cornerback, and I think he's going to be a really great complementary piece because Gonzalez, and this is not a shot, but Gonzalez, you guys know he's more of a finesse guy. He's a quiet guy. He's all about, the ball skills and running with the guy. He's not necessarily a physical cornerback. Davis is a really physical cornerback. I'm not talking about Brandon Browner kind of physical, but he's a really physical cornerback. And I think he's going to be a really good complement to what the Patriots want to do at the cornerback position. I talked to someone close to Jonathan Jones, and the hope is that he will find his way back to New England, but he is going to hit he's going to hit the market eyes wide open. You guys know me, I'm a sentimental old so-and-so here, but I think that, it's time to let him get a chance to win another ring. I do.
Yeah.
I think that, we talk about teams who are one guy away. If you're a team, again, the Bills, if you're another team that's like right there, that's knocking on the door, and you just need a little bit more depth in your secondary here, let me sell Jonathan Jones. Let me talk right to the camera and sell Jonathan Jones to another team out there. If you need one more guy, if you need a fast cornerback, help you out on special teams, you need a guy get you over the top. He's your guy. Jonathan Jones can still deliver on a semi-regular basis for another team out there, and he deserves the opportunity to win another ring.
Great locker room guy, too.
Oh, the best.
Real quick, just to follow up on the secondary, safety isn't a need, but Javon Holland is a name I can't get past. I would love him here, and I think he'd take some pressure off of Duggar, too. Do you feel the same way?
Yeah. I think he's going to be a little bit too expensive, though, given what they've spent so far. I think Javon Holland's the best safety out there, and he's going to command serious top-of-the-market money, and I think they may have committed a good chunk of the money to the guys that they're going to commit to, particularly on the defensive side of the ball. I'm right there with you, though. I think Holland's a great. I think Holland's a great safety, and I also agree with you that safety is kind of a sneaky important position for them. It may not necessarily be the one that you need to address, like in the first round of this year's draft, but you gotta kind of keep your eye on that position moving forward. I think that they're okay right now if they stay healthy. If they find a way to bring Jalen Hawkins back, I think Del Pettis played really well for them. I think Del Pettis, put it this way, I think Del Pettis exceeded expectations for them last year in the secondary, and I think he's going to be part of it moving forward. We talk about guys who have a little bit of versatility. We talk about Jonathan Jones. Jonathan Jones will play a little bit of safety as well. So if you bring him back, you have Pettis, you have a few other guys, you have Duggar, although Duggar's really more of a linebacker type. You do need, I'll say this, you need a center fielder. You need a classic center fielder on that defense. You could use a classic center fielder on that defense. Maybe not right now, but you're going to need to get one sooner rather than later.
Yeah, and I do think that that's more of a need for them than people think because of, you mentioned Hawkins as a free agent, the uncertainty of Jabril Peppers. You don't really have that true free safety that can play over the top, especially because they are going to play a lot of single high coverage in this new defensive scheme. You don't have that guy right now, so it is a sneaky need for them, just like corner was. I think a lot of people, when you think about cornerback, right, I think a lot of people thought, okay, well, they have Christian Gonzalez, but you can tell the last couple of years they've been a corner short, particularly on the field side. And Carlton Davis, to your earlier point, Chris, he's certainly going to address that, both in terms of run support and in man coverage. I love his length. He's 6'1", 210. He's physical. He can get handsy. He maintains hip position vertically, and he's tough. And I think he's going to give them some championship pedigree too. Of course, he won a Super Bowl in Tampa Bay with Tom Brady in 2021. So he's a guy that, that's the other thing that I think, people tend to forget. Mike Vrabel, and we know this, you've dealt with him a lot more than we have, certainly, but we know in being around him for the short time that we have, culture is important to him. Mm-hmm. This is why they emphasize signing guys that the coaching staff knew, that had coached before. They know what kind of guys they are. They know how they're going to fit into the room. culture is going to be a big part of it. High character is going to be a big part of it. Getting guys that are going to buy in, come in, commit, that are tough, hard-nosed, that want to win. It's not just going to be about the talent evaluation. It's going to be about getting guys that they know are going to clock in, give you everything they got, clock out, and come back and do it all over again the next day.
Bingo, right there. And look, Davis, anyone who was raised not raised, but anyone who's played more than had a cup of coffee in Detroit under Dan Campbell, I'm not going to question their defensive bona fides. So yeah, I think when you look at his background, when you look at his pedigree, when you look at what he's done in this league, what he's continued to do over the course of a very impressive career, I think he is a great fit for that team. And again, a lot of these guys today, you bring it up, not just today, but over the last 36 hours, they're tough guys. They're variable guys. You can kind of boil it down to one thing. They're tough, variable guys. They're guys who I think, the kind of guys you want in your locker room. It's the important guys. So it's been good. It's been good. And I think there's reason for optimism moving forward. I'm not going to, say they're a playoff team, but they're certainly a lot better off now than they were a year or so ago.
You are watching / listening to the New England Football Show presented by Mortgage Right. I'm your host, John Saradinas. As always, I'm joined by my partner, Kevin Stone. And tonight we are joined by the Boston Globe's Chris Price. Just a reminder, if you are entering the market either as a first-time home buyer, selling your current home and moving into your next one, or refinancing, give our good friend Herb Devine a call, 781-254-2846. You can also shoot him an email at herb@mortgageright.com. He and his team is available anytime, including nights and weekends.
All right, Chris, back to the offensive side. Again, there's still a lot of names out there for receiver, but ultimately, where do you think this goes? Because I wouldn't mind Cooper Kupp. I still think he has something left in the tank. You mentioned Hopkins and Diggs earlier. Obviously, they're on the back nine, but you need an adult in that room, in my opinion. I wouldn't mind them taking a flyer on either of those guys. I get your point about, they might be a final piece for a team, but in terms of helping Drake May, he needs an adult in that receiver room. Where do you think they ultimately go?
That's a great point, and I do, and I think that you could make an argument that maybe on the offense, someone like Hunter Henry is the adult, amongst the skill position guys, or maybe Ramondre Stevenson or Antonio Gibson. I know you guys think very highly of Antonio Gibson, as I do. So if this was 10 years ago and this was the 2015 Patriots and those guys were available, I think Cooper Kupp would be a natural fit. I think Stephon Diggs would be fantastic. I think DeAndre Hopkins here would be terrific. I just think the way that they're constructing this team, I don't know if they're going to necessarily, be interested in coming here for, you're going to have to overpay. We talked about it before. And I think that an overpay for one of these guys at this stage of their careers might be a little dangerous when you're talking about it from a pure team building perspective. I also don't know, I'm not going to pay. I think I'd like Stephon Diggs again, like you talked to you guys. I'm not going to pay Stephon Diggs $25 million a year at this stage of his career. I don't know.
Especially coming off a knee injury.
Yeah, I don't know what Stephon Diggs wants. I think the way they're constructing their team, I think that they're better off right now using a maybe a pick in the top 3 rounds on a wide receiver. And, if Travis Hunter falls to you at number 4, that's great. Go after Travis Hunter. If Ted McMillan, you trade down and you want to go after Ted McMillan and you feel good about your tackle situation, I think Ted McMillan in the top 10 would represent great value. I think Luther Burden out of Missouri, I think would be a really interesting fit for this team. But as it stands right now, I don't necessarily think you're going to be able to find a fit with one of those guys. Now, the one guy who might, be the exception of the rule is Brandon Ayuk. If you could figure out a trade, if you could figure out something along those lines, maybe then that's a possibility. But I think as it exists right now, I wouldn't be interested in one of those guys at this stage of their careers, put it that way.
Yeah, no, I agree with you, Chris. I wouldn't be either. And again, you got to think culture here. This is going to be a big part of what they do. And I don't want to overstate that. But if we're talking about culture here and character, you're not going to want a diva receiver like a Stephon Diggs who's going to require touches, or even a DeAndre Hopkins, even though he's a shell of the player he once was. those guys are going to require touches. Yeah, they're going to come in, they're going to bring some leadership in, some pedigree, some past production. But guess what? It's not about what they did, it's about what they're going to do. And at the end of the day, they're going to require a lot of management, both on and off the field. And I don't think Vrabel wants that. He's going to operate with a no-nonsense approach, a very Parcellian approach, in my opinion. It's going to be about getting guys to come in and buy in. And look, we've seen this with the Patriots before, right? Wide receiver might be a big need in our eyes, but maybe they don't see it that way. Remember now, Josh McDaniels is coming back. I like to call it the East Coast offense. He's bringing back remnants of their offense that they ran under Brady and Belichick. There will be some tweaks. You will see some of the modern West Coast offense and some of those elements with Thomas Brown there. But maybe they're looking at that room and saying, you know what, we think we have enough. Who knows? I don't think they do. I think in this day and age, you need a true number one receiver, especially for a young quarterback like Drake May. But maybe they're looking at this and saying, you know what? Josh McDaniels coached Matt Collins in Vegas in 2022. He knows what he brings to the table as a player and as a person. Maybe they're comfortable enough with what they have. Maybe they feel like they can get more out of Kendrick Bourne. Remember, in 2021, Kendrick Bourne had his best season as a Patriot under McDaniels. So
and I don't think
they might not think they need more.
Yeah, I agree with you. One name that I do like, John, and he's not a number one receiver, but he kind of, we made the reference, he kind of checks a lot of boxes, is Amari Cooper.
Yeah.
Amari Cooper has played in a lot of different offenses. He's had a lot of different quarterbacks. This guy's a shapeshifter. This guy's done a lot of different things over the course of his career. And I'm not saying that he's the answer to all your problems, but I think he is the guy amongst this remaining class of free agents who could be a quote-unquote leader, kind of an adult in that room. He has a veteran perspective. This is a guy who is probably going to be more cost-effective than some of the more high-end guys. Amari Cooper might be the guy who you could bring in here. Again, he's not going to be a 100-catch guy, but given his history across the league, given the fact he's a well-respected guy, played in a lot of different offenses, done a lot of different things, I think he might be the guy that you can point to and say, okay, let's think about him. Let's think about him as part of our offense in 2025, specific to the passing game. Again, this is a guy who's done a lot of different stuff. And, I talked to my podcast partner, Chris Hogan, about this, that, Josh is very demanding on these wide receivers. And Cooper, there's not a lot that he hasn't seen. And so he might end up being one of those guys who can fit.
Hey, unrelated, Chris, I wanted to ask you, are you concerned, going back to Milton Williams, one of the big things that had been talked about going into free agency was the fact that he had only played in 50% of the Eagles' snaps since they drafted him in the third round out of Louisiana Tech. Does that concern you now that he's going to have to play a bigger role? I mean, he had a career year last year, 5 sacks, his 11.5 career sacks, but he's going to have to play a lot more now. Any concern there with that? Certainly you're paying him top 5 money. You're paying him like an elite level talent, but he hasn't had to play the snap total of an elite level talent thus far in his career.
I don't know if he will necessarily have to play that snap total here in New England if Christian Barmore is healthy.
Yeah,
I think I think his future is going to be tied up in Christian Barmore. I think if Barmore is healthy, I think you take an awful lot off Milton Williams' plate. That's not to say they couldn't play together, but there is a little bit of positional redundancy there, like a little bit. But look, if both those guys are healthy, I think it's a very good complementary relationship. I think there's a concern anytime you dole out a contract to that size, regardless of who you are. And, you have to hope that the guy who is either next to him or behind him on the depth chart could handle things if, God forbid, something happened. But I wouldn't necessarily say I'm necessarily, concerned, but it's certainly something worth monitoring. I'll say that moving forward.
One guy we haven't mentioned yet, or not much, Harold Landry. Basically their first big signing of this period. I loved it off the bat. You look at his numbers, and the sack numbers, they're there over his career, but his pressure rate wasn't great the past couple of years. I still think, again, veteran guy, good locker room guy, local guy as well, coming from BC. I think it's a good signing, but where do you stand on Landry?
I do. I think that he may be moving to the next phase of his career, and that he becomes a purely third down pass rushing presence, or just on passing downs. You bring up, and Kevin, I'm glad you bring this up, that his pass, his rush rate numbers are not fantastic over the last couple of years, but I think if used well, that's going to be a big thing with him. I think you're going to want to put him in positions to succeed. You're not going to ask him to play 80% of the snaps or 90% of the snaps because he's not that player. I think if you use him judiciously, that is to say, if you use him in passing downs and third and longs in other situations, or maybe he's got a little bit of positional versatility, you can move him around a little bit. I think you can be really good with him, and I think also too, like we talked before, when you consider his history with Vrabel, I think Vrabel is going to work hard not to put him in position where he's going to be, exposed, for lack of a better term. He knows his strengths, he knows his weaknesses, he knows how to maximize his strengths and minimize the weaknesses. So, I think he's going to be a guy I'm fascinated to see if he can stay on the field, and B, how much more he can be at this stage of his career other than just a pass rush guy.
Chris, obviously the Patriots, before all of this started, and they started burning that cash like Gerard Mayo said last year, before they started burning all that cash today, they did make a trade this morning prior to the start of the free agency frenzy, trading defensive tackle Devon Godshaw to the New Orleans Saints for a 7th-round pick. And look, obviously, last week during the combine, when it was announced that he was given permission to seek a trade, a lot of us thought, well, the reason he's being given permission to seek a trade is he's not a system fit. I think it was more than that. The thing about Devon is he was good with us, but he's a strong personality, and that may not have necessarily jived in Mike Vrabel's world. Do you see any other veterans on this team that are on the market that we could see get traded here in the coming days and weeks?
I don't think any other guys are going to be traded out of town. I think there may be a guy who is, and I'm not trying to be all coy and talk about David Andrews. I think there could be a cut. I think guys could be cut, or I think guys are going to be moved. Dietrich Wise, who is another personal favorite, I don't know if he's going to be re-signed because I don't necessarily know if he's
after today. I'd be hard pressed to see.
Yeah, I don't necessarily think.
I think we all love Dietrich.
And let's pour a little bit out for Devon Godshaw, one of the best guys to speak with. Look, fans shouldn't give a crap about that. Fans don't give a crap about that, and I understand that. But he was so great talking to us. One of the things that I loved about him is he was always a straight shooter. So, I don't necessarily think we're going to see another player traded out of that locker room. I'll put it that way. There may be guys who come in. There may be guys who are cut. There may be guys who aren't re-signed. But I don't think we're going to see another player traded off of that roster.
I want to ask you about David Andrews, just because, I asked Scott Peters last year, and he basically said Andrews was a coach, off the field. So you have that element in the room. Is this more up to him or up to Mike Vrabel, do you think? Because I'd like to think it's up to him, just given the amount of respect he sort of has earned throughout his career. But do you feel the same way, or is this, Vrabel just has to, rip the Band-Aid off sort of thing?
Well, that's a good way to put it. It really is, man. I don't want to be the guy who has to tell David Andrews that he's done. I'll put it that way. Right. I wouldn't want to be that guy. That's going to be a tough conversation to have. We talked about Jonathan Jones being, the man, one of the last remaining links. You could even go deeper with a guy like David Andrews. So, I think he can still play. It may be a question of, does he want to play for a winner? Does he want to go? There may be extenuating circumstances. It could be a family thing. I don't know. I'll say this. I haven't heard anything about him being released, as we sit here right now on March 10th. I have not heard anything about it. Obviously, as you guys know, it's an extremely fluid situation at this time of year. Things can change very, very dramatically at the drop of a hat. But I don't think anything's going to happen. And the thing it would be tough because, look, I grew very fond of a number of guys covering this team. Vince Wilfork, guys like that, where it's just you see them and they leave, and I get it, the business, but I would hate to see like David Andrews in a Falcons uniform next year. It wouldn't be right. I understand it. I understand the business of football, and I understand that that's the way it works these days. But if this is true, if all this is true, I'm not saying it is. And again, I want to stress that I have not heard anything about this, the possibility of this, but it would suck. It would, wouldn't it? Just to see a guy like that, who's given so much, finish his career in another uniform. Again, I'd understand it, but no, I don't think anyone wants to see that.
Yeah, and just, we talk about having adults in the room. I can't get two images out of my head. One, but he would come up to the podium still in his pads before, Bill or anything like that, when the team was just getting beaten down. And then last year, the breakup day, he talked for what, 25 minutes at his walker. So just for me, it's hard to imagine not wanting that guy in the building in some capacity.
Yeah. Yeah. And look, at the same time too, there's a desire, I think, on the part of a lot of people to kind of turn the page. There's a reason that Matthew Slater isn't with the team anymore. Is not going to be with the team in 2025. There's a reason. I don't know about Troy Brown, but maybe it's going to be the same kind of situation. I understand the desire for the franchise to have a fresh start. It would be awful strange around there without David Andrews.
Yeah, I mean, I do think, though, and I don't want to be that guy that brings it back to football. I do think in a way, though, for all that he's meant to the franchise, obviously he's a two-time Super Bowl winner. He's been a linchpin for the organization the last 10 years. I do think they need to make a decision on Cole Strange. Of course, they're going to have to decide this May if they want to pick up his fifth-year option. Obviously, we don't think that they're going to. But he did look pretty good at center the last 2 weeks of the season against the Chargers and Bills. And so if you're going to salvage Cole Strange, that might be the way to do it. Have him slide inside and play center. And maybe you don't pick up the option, but he plays well enough, let's say, if he starts for you at center next year, that you end up re-signing him next offseason. So, yes, I agree. It would stink to see David Andrews go. But I think the Patriots are in a position now where they have to make a decision at that position because another guy we didn't mention is Jake Andrews. He's another guy that's going to be in the mix here when we talk about that interior offensive line glut. So they've got a couple bodies here that they need to take a look at.
They do. It's going to, like I said, it's going to be a tough call moving forward. And Ben Brown is part of that conversation as well.
Exactly.
We didn't mention him either. They have some options. They have options in case, they have some insurance in case something happens. So let's just put it that way. And again, the football fan in me is going to keep his fingers crossed that they find a way to keep David Andrews around. But the realist, the literalist, the sports writer in me understands the reality of the situation.
Yeah, and that's today's world, right? I mean, look, we talked about this earlier with Jonathan Jones. It'd be nice to have him back, but realistically speaking, it's probably not going to happen. And the reality is, if you're Jonathan Jones, and you made this point, Chris, go out and try to compete for a ring. Patriots aren't quite there yet. Even after today, they'll be better. They're not a 4-win team next year based on what they did today, but they're not a Super Bowl contender either. So if you're Jonathan Jones, go out and try to get that one more ring. Try to at least have a shot at it.
And that's my hope for David Andrews as well. And look, if this is the end for him here in New England, he finds a way to get to a team that is Super Bowl ready, that just needs one more veteran offensive lineman to help put him over the top.
Yeah. No, I agree with you wholeheartedly. Now, obviously, we've got plenty more time when it comes to free agency here. They're certainly not done. They still have enough cap space that they can go out and make a couple of other moves. If you had your druthers, Chris, what would you like to see them do over the course of the next couple of days in free agency?
I would continue to make calls on some of those veterans. We talked about Amari Cooper before. I also wouldn't be surprised to see them go after some more former Vrabel guys in Tennessee. But I think that the plan now is to look at the offensive side of the ball in the draft, and not really specifically the offensive tackle spot and the wide receiver position. But I would also keep the phone lines open. Maybe you place a call to John Lynch out in San Francisco every so often just to check on the status of someone like Brandon Ayuk, because I think that would be that'd be a completely feasible path for them moving forward at the wide receiver position. So they need to get a left tackle. They need to get a wide receiver, and I think they could use one more big body up front along the defensive line. So, that's the focus in no particular order. Get those 3 spots, take care of those the rest of this offseason. Those are the priorities for this team moving forward.
Chris, in terms of just sort of Vrabel making his statement, or for lack of a better term, impact on this team, we've all heard, who has more say? Is it Elliott Wolf? Is it Vrabel? I think today was a no-brainer that this is Vrabel's team. Do you agree?
Yeah, I do. I do. I think that it's my understanding that the way this whole thing operates, that Cowden and Elliott and Alonzo Highsmith and Matt Groh and everyone kind of, Vrabel will say, okay, well, let's go get a right tackle. Okay, well, here, guys, we'll put together a list. And, all those guys will put together a list, and Vrabel will go, all right, I want that one. Or I want, here's the priority order for guys for me. And so I think, put it this way, I think Mike Vrabel has the loudest voice in the room when it comes to personnel. I think it is a true collaborative effort, but at the same time, at the end of the day, as he said at the combine, Vrabel said, I'm not taking this job unless I have a little bit of autonomy over the roster. And I think that we saw that today, saw that over the last couple of days. I think you're going to see it more and more moving forward.
Yeah, going back to what you were saying a couple minutes ago, Chris, about them working the phones. I know that obviously offensive linemen are precious in this league, and there are not enough of them to go around, not enough great ones or even good ones for that matter. But if I were them, I would still work the phone when it comes to a left tackle, because take, for example, the LA Chargers. You're going to have to make a decision here. They've got a lot of money tied into that offensive line. Of course, they drafted Joe Alt last year, played him at right tackle. He can play left tackle. It's probably not a bad idea, even though it doesn't seem like they want to give up draft capital, that they, basically based on what you're seeing, they want to hold on to it. That's why they didn't ultimately swing a trade for DK Metcalf, and that's why it doesn't seem like they're going to trade for a receiver. Who knows? We'll see. But I don't think it would hurt to call a team like the Chargers and say, hey, what would it cost us to get Rashawn Slater?
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Or call the New York Giants and say, what would it cost us to maybe get an Andrew Thomas? Like, there are tackles out there that you might be able to pry away from a team at the right price. At the very least, I would think they'd do their due diligence and make those phone calls, because that might be your best avenue to get that left tackle to solidify the position.
Especially as we get closer to the draft and teams get a little panicky and start to worry about draft position and draft capital. And the fact that they have 3 picks, in the top 100, right? I think 3 or 4 picks in the top 100. You keep your options open. And we're not talking enough about, team building is a year-round activity and it involves a lot of different things. And so, keep all your options open, especially, the possibility of trading for someone at that tackle position.
Last one for me, or one of the last ones for me. We have a month until the draft at this point. Do you feel like they're all on the same page in terms of exact direction? Now, obviously, free agency sort of dictates where they go, but when we start getting to pro days and stuff like that, when they walk into a building, are they on the same page, or is there still going to be some, I want this, no, I want this type of thing going on? Because I feel like there is a clear message from Vrabel at the combine. It was a complete opposite of Gerard Mayo. It was concise, clear. I feel like they're on the same page, but are they? What do you think they are?
Yeah, well, they're always in even the best run organizations. There's going to be discord when it comes to the draft. I've had assistant coaches and scouts and talk to me about guys who are banging on the table for this player, and the coach doesn't believe him. And I just did a podcast with Brad Seeley, who talked about the process that went into drafting Matthew Slater and having to convince Bill Belichick that Matthew Slater was going to be a great special teamer in the league. And so there's always going to be conflict, and scouts are always going to stand up for their guys, and assistant coaches are always going to advocate for, if I'm a running backs coach, I'm going to want 9 running backs in this draft. But I think to a large extent, I think when you look at the direction of this franchise moving forward, I think they are all very much on the same page when it comes to the priorities, when it comes to what they need to do to get this thing fixed, when it comes to get this thing turned around. They all understand that it's not going to be a quick fix, something that's going to be, pop up out of nowhere. But at the same time, they all understand that they're all in this together. Again, I've referenced this a couple times so far, and I'll continue to reference it, as they're in a much better position now than they were in hindsight. Now they're in a much better position now than they were a year ago.
Yeah, and I'll go back to the one thing I do want to point out when people start talking about Mike Vrabel versus Gerard Mayo. Gerard had never been a head coach before. Vrabel's been a head coach before. He knows how to communicate his message to the media. He knows how to deal with the media. Gerard was learning on the fly. The NFL is not a league where you want to do anything on the fly. So I think at the end of the day, I think it's unfair to compare Vrabel to Gerard Mayo because, like I said, Gerard was truly a first-year head coach. He was learning on the job.
Yeah. It was not in, again, kind of some of the stuff that people have told me. It was just, he was not set up to succeed in the way he probably should have been set up to succeed. And I think if they had to do it all over again, the Patriots would do a lot of things differently. But yeah, I think it's a little bit unfair. And it starts with, like you said, John, it starts with the fact that, look, Vrabel's done this before. And it sounds very simple and very elementary, but there's a shorthand that exists when you've coached in the National Football League that just doesn't exist if you've never done it before. And so I think that's very important to keep in mind when you talk about the conversation regarding the difference between the two head coaches.
Final question here from us tonight, Chris, and obviously it's about free agency today, and it will be at least for the rest of this week. Then we're on to the draft. But assuming this is the last time we have you on between now and the draft, what would you what would you like to see them do with pick number 4? What direction do you want to see them going in terms of a player, or what do you want to see them do with the pick potentially when it comes to possibly even moving it?
I think if either Abdul Carter or Travis Hunter are there at 4, you rush the card to the podium and you don't look back. And that is going to be your guy moving forward. I think Travis Hunter is the only guy either in free agency or the draft this year where you can't look at him and say, well, if we swing and miss and we can't get Travis Hunter, we'll just get the next guy in the draft like Travis Hunter. We'll just get another guy like him. We'll be able to get, Travis Hunter light. Travis Hunter light doesn't exist. Travis Hunter is a unicorn. The Shohei Ohtani fan in me loves Travis Hunter. And he's a dynamite player. And if I'm a Patriots fan, I want it all. There's going to be all sorts of, drama around him, and there's going to be missteps. He's going to say the wrong thing and do the wrong thing. But in the long run, he is a tremendous dynamic talent. I feel strongly, not as strongly, but I feel strongly about the idea of having Abdul Carter. If one of those two guys is there at 4, they're your guy. If not, you have to decide, depending on how the rest of free agency plays out, probably Mason Graham or Will Campbell. If you don't like either one of those guys, you trade back maybe 3, 4, 5 spots into the late stages of the top 10, and you go get yourself Kelvin Banks or Ted McMillan, and then you move forward from there. But I think if you decide to trade back, if you don't take Mason Graham, I think you need to address the offensive side of the ball. That is, again, if Abdul Carter's not there, you need to address the offensive side of the ball. And all of those guys, McMillan, Hunter, all those guys are part of that conversation when you talk about improving the offense.
I will say this, and I think it might excite Patriot fans. The obvious pick there is an offensive tackle because that's their biggest need. It's a glaring need. But I will say this: they signed Matt Collins today, but they're not going to be able to get that number 1 type receiver. It's not going to happen unless you trade for an Ayuk or you trade for a Kupp and somehow he comes back to form. I think Travis Hunter is in play at 4 for them. I really do. And I think when you look at the way this team is constructed right now, I think that the Travis Hunter Patriots talk is real, and I think that they may like him at this moment, and this is strictly my opinion. I think they may like him more than a Will Campbell right now because I'm from the Dante Scarnecchia school. I've known Scar for a long time. I've talked football with him. I've talked line play with him. I've seen him clinic. Scar doesn't care about arm length, and I don't care about arm length either. I coached offensive line. I'm more of a vertical length guy. But I think that the arm length will matter to the Patriots. And that's why I think ultimately, as much as Campbell seems to be the obvious pick there, I think if Travis Hunter is there, he's going to be more in play for them than people think, because if you can get him into the fold, Yeah, you signed Carlton Davis, but he can play in the slot. He can play nickel for you, and you can play more on offense if you take him. So to your point, Chris, I definitely think he's going to be in play a lot more than we probably originally thought.
I love it. I love it. I look and look. I'm a sports writer rooting for the story. I fully admit to that. But give me the full Travis Hunter experience. Give me Coach Prime showing up in Foxborough, giving me give me him playing offense and defense, running back pick sixes. I'm excited for the whole thing. Yeah. He's you know what he is? He's you get Tyreek Hill, but he can also play cornerback. He's just I can't say enough about him. I do, and I think and this is the last thing for me when you talk about Travis Hunter. Travis Hunter has a big personality. We all know that Travis Hunter has a huge personality, and so I think you're going to need a coach with a little bit of swagger, a little bit of brashness to be able to kind of control that. And I think Vrabel's the kind of guy who will be able to kind of find a way to make it work when you talk about fitting him into an NFL environment.
Well, and Chris, real quick, just to add to that, he'll sell jerseys immediately. Like, if you want buzz, if the Crafts want, to get asses and seats again, go get that guy, if anybody else.
Exactly. Put him on the front of the media guy, put him on the front of the program. All Travis all day. I'm all in.
Yeah, well, here comes Coach John Sirianitas. But let me tell you something. Drake May will be on his ass if you can't protect him. So it's great. It's great to get asses and seats and sell jerseys and have Travis Hunter, but you got to keep your quarterback upright. That's priority number one. So I'm not sure if Vrabes is going to see it that way. Chris, I want to say thank you for taking the time, my friend. It's always great to see you, and looking forward to seeing you up at the stadium here in the near future.
Thank you, Chris.
Definitely. Take care, guys. Talk soon.
Thanks, Chris. That is Chris Price from the Boston Globe. That'll do it for this week's episode of the New England Football Show. For Kevin Stone, Chris Price, I'm John Sirianitas. We'll be back with you next week. Until then, peace.